Welcome to the African Strata, where every layer tells a new story. Support the channel. Like, subscribe, and share for more real African stories.
Burkina Faso didn't just wake up one day and decide to ban foreign land ownership. It happened because people got tired. Tired of being tenants on land they were born on. Tired of hearing their fields were unused, just because they didn't come with French paperwork. Tired of seeing outsiders buy rivers, forests, and whole villages, then disappear behind barbed wire and legal contracts. For years, land was quietly sold off through brokers, loopholes, and silence. The maps changed. The names didn't. No headlines, no outrage, just deals. And then suddenly, someone said, "Stop. No more. Not yours. Not for sale." That's when the noise started. Foreign investors called it unpredictable. Diplomats called it risky. Consultants called it a step backwards. But let's ask, backwards for who? Not for the farmers who finally got proof they weren't trespassers. Not for the women who stopped needing permission to plant. Not for the kids who could grow up knowing their land wouldn't be handed off behind closed doors. The only ones calling it chaos were the ones who lost control. So no, this wasn't a collapse. It was a reset. A clear line drawn after decades of blurred ones. If that makes the old players uncomfortable, they're welcome to leave. Let's be real, land wasn't just dirt. It was the whole deal. The difference between having a future or just surviving another season. Between staying or getting pushed out, quietly, one signed paper at a time. And the system knew that. That's why land was kept in the hands of the few, on purpose. Not because people didn't understand ownership, but because the rules were built to keep them out of it. If you were local, you needed witnesses, surveys, approvals, fees. If you were foreign, a lawyer, a flight ticket, and a handshake with someone in the ministry got you thousands of hectares. Fast. Some even bought land they'd never seen in person. Didn't need to, because land here was just another column on a spreadsheet in Europe or the Gulf. Meanwhile, the people living on it, farming, raising kids, burying their dead, were told they didn't have enough proof. Proof? They had harvest records. They had boundary trees older than any city planner. They had names passed down through soil and story. The problem was never proof. The problem was permission. Who gets to say it counts? Who gets to decide what's legal and what's not? That's what changed. This law didn't just hand out paper, it dismantled the gatekeeping. Now, a woman in Fada can apply for a lease without needing her husband's cosign. A group of herders in the north can map their seasonal routes and protect them from being carved up. Young people can look at land as something they own, not something they'll inherit chaos from. That's not just reform, that's reversal. And of course it made people nervous, because when you level the field, people with advantage start acting like they're under attack. So ask yourself, if this kind of change happened in your country, would it be called empowerment, or would someone call it a threat to the economy? If you're not sure, you already know the answer. For years, they said rural people didn't have proof of ownership. That's why they couldn't access loans, defend land rights, or stop evictions. But let's get it straight. The problem wasn't proof. It was who gets to decide what proof counts. You think a paper from a dusty office in the capital is more valid than 3 generations farming the same land? You think a stamped French language title means more than every neighbor in the village pointing to that plot and saying, "Yeah, that's hers"? Come on, people had evidence. They had records, even if they weren't typed. They had planting cycles, dispute resolutions, and land passed down with rules stricter than any formal code. What they didn't have was permission. From the state, from foreign consultants, from systems designed to keep them out. That's what the reform broke. It didn't just hand out new documents, it redefined what counts as valid. In Dibougou, they accepted locally signed co-op land claims with community endorsement. In Kaya, satellite imagery was used to back up oral claims, merging tradition with tech. And in multiple provinces, women's groups filed bulk lease applications, tied to local work programs and school access. Suddenly, land validation wasn't a mystery. It was administration. Clear, public, local. No more hidden channels. No more friend of a minister shortcuts. And once people saw that, everything changed. Farmers began planting multi-year crops again. Credit unions began accepting land documents for small loans. Water access got mapped before deals were signed, not after. Ask any mayor who tried to sneak in a foreign lease after the reform. It doesn't slide anymore. People show up, they ask questions, they file appeals. This isn't just new paperwork, it's a new posture. We're not asking, can we prove we belong here? We're saying, prove to us that you're not the one trespassing. Before the reform, access to land wasn't just about money. It was about knowing the right people. There were gatekeepers in every province, officials, brokers, insiders, who decided who got land and who didn't. And they didn't need laws. They just needed silence. Silence from the people too afraid to speak up. Silence from the ministries that looked the other way. A farmer would spend 10 years on a plot, make it fertile, build a home. Then one day, a cousin of some ex-minister would show up with a lease nobody had seen before. And just like that, everything gone. Now? Try that again. Since the reform, gatekeeping isn't as easy. You can't fake a document and expect it to slide through the new digital system. Local councils double-check claims. Registries are being cleaned. Cases are being reviewed publicly. In Kupela, a land officer who tried to push an old lease through the new system got blocked by his own junior staff. They flagged it. Investigated. The council shut the deal down. Because now it's not just about title. It's about trust. And trust doesn't come from wearing a badge or knowing someone at the ministry. It comes from transparency. And the people have started doing their own audits. In Ziniare, youth groups map active land deals. They track ownership shifts. They publish it online. They knock on doors when names don't match. No threat, no shouting, just, "We're watching now." That shift, from asking to checking, is what scares the old guard most. So if anyone still thinks this reform is about paperwork, they've missed the point. This is about flipping the question from, "Can we get permission?" to, "Can you prove authority?" There was a time when losing land felt normal. Not because it was fair, but because it happened so often, people got tired of fighting it. You'd hear stories like, "My uncle's farm was taken in '98. They said our village wasn't on the map. They moved the boundary while we were still planting. And nobody got punished. Ever. Because the system was built to make it look legal. A stamp here. A file moved there. Maybe a lawyer in the capital who corrected a record for the right price. Then, boom. Your home was someone else's asset. But not anymore. The reform didn't just stop foreign ownership. It broke the habit of silence. It forced people to start asking questions they were once too tired or too scared to ask. Now? In Toma, a whole village filed a retroactive dispute on a land deal signed 11 years ago. And won. The lease was revoked, publicly, and the official who approved it got suspended. In Ouagadougou's outskirts, 3 women tracked down old transaction records, matched them with oral testimonies, and exposed a fake land swap scheme between a developer and a local office. They weren't activists. They were vendors. They just got tired of being erased quietly. That's the shift. Before, people thought losing land was part of life. Now, they treat it like fraud. And they're not just reacting, they're preventing. Local councils now require dual verification. One technical, one community-based. Satellite maps cross-referenced with village elders. Even informal settlements are being documented and registered before speculators show up with plans. This isn't reform on paper. It's protection before crisis hits. So ask yourself, how many land grabs go unnoticed in your country? How many communities get priced out before they know what's happening? And more importantly, what would change if people stopped thinking eviction was just how it works? As soon as the law dropped, headlines followed. Burkina Faso risks scaring away foreign investment. Anti-market sentiment growing in West Africa. Reform threatens economic progress. Translation: rich people don't like being told no. They framed it like a collapse. But let's look at what really happened. Over 60% of land previously held by absentee foreign entities is now in public or cooperative hands. In 6 provinces, crop yields actually increased because farmers planted long-term instead of short-season cash grabs. In Gawa, one local grain co-op saw a 40% rise in output within the first year of land security. Local microcredit approvals doubled because land titles finally held real value at community banks. Tell me, how's that bad for the economy? The truth is, the reform didn't destroy the market. It changed who had access to it. And for those who built their profits on silence and shortcuts, yes, it's a threat. Because now, every new project has to pass through 2 approvals, one from the law, one from the people who live there. No more fake consultations. No more "we'll build a school later" promises that never happen. Now, if you want the land, you better come with receipts and accountability. And look, we're not against investment. We're against theft dressed as opportunity. The mayor of Bogandé put it best. If you want to do business here, bring your idea, not your bulldozer. That's the new rule. Development doesn't start with a ribbon cutting. It starts with a question. Who lives here, and what do they want? So if the only way your project works is by removing people quietly, it's not a project. It's displacement with a logo. Let's be honest. Maps have never been neutral. They've been used to disappear people, to reclassify villages into investment zones, to turn rivers into property lines and homes into undeveloped territory. That's how thousands of hectares were grabbed, legally. Not with bulldozers at first, but with maps that made life invisible. Ask anyone in Compiègne what happened in 2009. A rezoning project came through. Satellite images, new borderlines. Suddenly, the grazing route their families had used for generations was part of a private hunting reserve. No vote, no warning, no recourse. But now, that playbook isn't working anymore. Because for the first time, we're making our own maps. In Kudogu, a group of high school graduates built a full community GIS database using open-source software. They mapped farmland, water points, sacred sites, then took it to the municipal office and said, "Here's your update. This is what's real." In Dori, herders used GPS watches to track their seasonal paths. They overlaid it with state zoning and proved 5 new vacant lots were in active use. The deals got blocked. In Gaongo, women's farming collectives created heat maps showing crop rotation patterns. Not for fun. To defend their land when a foreign NGO tried to label it underutilized and repurpose it for a pilot project. This isn't just activism, it's data sovereignty. And it changes everything, because when people can prove they're present, not just in person, but in pixels, in documents, in coordinates, they become harder to erase. And these maps don't sit in some dusty office. They're printed, laminated, stuck on the wall of every village hall. They're shown in budget meetings. They're pulled out when a buyer comes snooping. That's the shift. Before, we didn't know. Now, here's the evidence. What's your excuse? It's not perfect. Some maps are incomplete. Some councils still don't know how to read satellite overlays. But people are learning. Fast. And the people who used to redraw boundaries behind closed doors, now they're being watched. Not just by activists, by farmers, grandmothers, students with cracked screens and sharp memories. So the next time someone tries to pull the old trick, restructure, reclassify, rename, they better check who's holding the pen now. Taking land back was just the surface. What really shook things up? People started rewriting the entire process. Because for decades, land wasn't lost one plot at a time. It was lost through systems, forms people couldn't read, meetings they weren't invited to, regulations that sounded neutral but always favored the ones with connections. You weren't just outnumbered, you were outstructured. The old system worked like this. A deal is made in the capital. A document is signed by someone you've never met. A contractor shows up with police, and then you hear about it. Even if you protested, they'd say, "It's already approved. Too late." Now, that script doesn't land the same. In Tenkodago, communities demanded pre-notice hearings before any lease validation. They got it. Voted into law at district level. Now, if you plan to touch land, you have to face the people first. In person. In Didugu, a farmer union got a seat on the local land commission. They pushed through a rule that no parcel larger than 10 hectares can be approved without triple verification: technical, legal, and community-backed. And in Banfora, a civil tech group built a tool to track lease processing times. It exposed delays, favoritism, and mysterious lost applications. Within 3 months, 2 officials were quietly removed. This is no longer about asking for a voice. It's about being the structure. No more being spoken for. Now it's, where's our rep on this panel? Who reviewed the deal? Is this decision logged and published? You can't silence people who are running the process, and you can't co-opt a movement that keeps rewriting its own rules. Of course, not everyone's happy. Middlemen are losing business. Departments used to pushing paper without oversight are sweating. Old donors are confused, because the usual capacity-building playbook isn't needed when people already built their own tools. So if you're looking at Burkina Faso and thinking, they just nationalized land. No, they democratized the whole mechanism. And once people realize they can redesign the rules themselves, land is just the beginning. You can always tell a reform is working by who's pissed off. And right now, a lot of people are pissed. Foreign investors calling emergency meetings. Embassy reps asking for clarity. Regional banks issuing quiet warnings about market uncertainty. Translation? They're not in control anymore. Before, you could predict how things worked. Grease the right hands, fast-track a lease, ignore the locals. If anyone resisted, you'd throw in some vague promise. We'll build a road, maybe a clinic. Then move on. That strategy? Dead. Now, when you try to push a land deal without transparency, 10 things happen. 1. The village council demands documentation. 2. The registry office checks for duplications. 3. Local youth post your name online. 4. Women's groups ask who's impacted. 5. The local radio starts asking questions. 6. Someone from the diaspora calls their cousin. 7. An independent tracker logs your request. 8. A district official double-checks the coordinates. 9. Your PR team gets flooded. 10. And suddenly, you're not anonymous anymore. That's not chaos. That's accountability. And of course they hate it. They call it nationalism. They call it anti-development. They say the environment for foreign partnership is deteriorating. Let's be real. What's deteriorating is unearned influence. And if that makes them angry, good. Because the old model ran on quiet deals, the new one runs on public process. So when someone at a roundtable says, investors are growing nervous, ask them this: why is that your priority? Why isn't it the farmers who stayed when the economy crashed? Why not the women who fed whole towns during droughts? Why not the people who've never left, but were never listened to? This reform didn't destabilize the country. It revealed who'd been standing on unstable ground this whole time. So yeah, if they're this angry, we're probably right where we need to be. We're not background characters in someone else's development story anymore. No more waiting for approvals from people who don't live here. No more losing land to contracts we never saw. No more asking politely to exist in systems that were never built for us. The land is just the beginning. Because once people realize they can control what they stand on, they start questioning everything else. Who controls water rights? Who decides what progress looks like? Who benefits when a mega project gets greenlit, and who disappears? This isn't about isolation. It's about terms. Burkina Faso isn't rejecting the world. It's rejecting the version of the world where locals get the crumbs after the deal's done. And if that version doesn't work anymore, too bad. Because if we've learned one thing from this, the systems we need don't have to be imported. We can build them ourselves. We already are. So if you're watching this and thinking, that's just Burkina, stop. Ask, what would it look like if people where you live stopped waiting for permission too? Who would get uncomfortable? Who would fight back? And most importantly, would you stand still or would you step in? If you've got an answer, say it. Comment. Share this. Tell someone what's happening here. Because this story isn't over. It's a blueprint, and someone's going to need it.